Welcome to BFM's Health and Living 8th webinar. This is the last of our Health and Living webinar series, which started in April of this year. And, we've been faithfully bringing you one webinar every month. And this is, of course, possible thanks to our presenting sponsor, AIA Berhad. So thank you to all of you as well who have been watching and staying with us. We have had one lucky draw prize every month, and we will have one for this webinar as well, and one grand prize at the end of this series, and you'll stand a chance to win a Samsung Galaxy Watch Active 2 worth 999 ringgit courtesy of AIA Vitality. And here's how you can participate in today's lucky draw. Watch the full webinar, of course, stay with us, and then you can click the link provided in the comments section to download a special kids playbook that we have prepared just for all of you parents out there, and you'll be in the running to win a Touch and Go e-wallet reload pin worth 200 ringgit courtesy of AIA Vitality. So last month we did have a winner for our lucky draw, and the winner for last month's webinar is Sharif M. Sharif. Congratulations, Sharif, and BFM's events team will be in touch to arrange the logistics for you to collect your prize. As a bonus, we are also hosting a live Kahoot quiz at the end of this webinar, where you can stand a chance to win other prizes apart from the lucky draw. So stay with us all the way to the end to participate in that quiz. Today, we'll be talking about children and learning. Every child's learning ability is different. Some may even have learning difficulties. And this all means that a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to education and development cannot be used, for every single child. And every child, regardless of their ability, needs the right support so that their education is not disrupted. And I think this has become more important than ever during this pandemic, where a lot of learning has taken place online at home, and perhaps children have been left out in some way or other. So we want to discuss today how parents and educators can tell if their kids are struggling to learn and how we can support them. Our speakers today, Dr. Rajini Sarvananthan, Consultant Developmental Paediatrician. How are you, Dr. Rajini?
Fine, thank you, Shiao.
And Madeleine Proud also joining us, Alternative Pathway Curriculum Coordinator and Special Education Teacher at Nexus International School. Hi, Maddie, how are you?
Hi, very well, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting us here today.
So our guests are here to answer your questions as well, whether you're a parent, an educator, perhaps a young person, and that there are concerns that you have about children and their learning. Post your questions in the comments section and we will try to get to them. Dr. Rajini, how can parents and educators tell when a child is struggling with learning in school, and especially where there is the danger that stereotypes of being lazy or slow or disruptive may be applied? So how do we make sure that we are identifying children who are struggling?
I think first thing is obviously knowing what the range of norm is, because children acquire skills at different times. Yeah, it's not that you have to be reading by 5 or 6, or there's no one specific age. So it's important that all involved understand that. Number two, yes, if children are acting out in situations where learning is taking place, but they don't seem to be acting out when it's non-learning activities, that should alert parents too, because that may be a sign that the child is stressed about the whole process of learning. And that in itself tells you that that is already a difficulty, even though the child may be actually achieving the goals that have been set. Yeah. And, early signs often, we always talk about the at-risk child. So children who may have had delays in their early skills, whether it be speech and language skills, or even motor skills, those children are at risk, and we should probably be monitoring them and intervening before they get into the stage of exhibiting behaviors. One of the early predictors of learning difficulties is actually the development of language in preschoolers. Often children who have learning issues present early on with delays in understanding language, in communicating, even articulation problems. So, in the Malaysian context, we always talk about the child who is pelat, yeah, or the child who has a lot of articulation problems. Even children with articulation problems are actually at risk of learning problems.
So that there are actually a lot of things that perhaps we tend to brush off as well, we just they'll catch up, or they'll change, but there are things that need to be seen as red flags. Maddie, from a learning perspective, what do you observe that could be flags that a child is struggling?
I think initially it's like perhaps it could be things like a learner might like not want to come to school, refusing to go to school, or not wanting to talk about school. Perhaps their attitude has changed. Perhaps they're no longer participating or showing an interest in some of the activities they were quite passionate about beforehand. Maybe they come to school and they look a lot tighter because perhaps their sleeping pattern has all been adjusted, or they're not eating well. Perhaps not spending as much time socializing or talking to their friends, and becoming a lot more inward about with themselves. Maybe they've got a lot of worries about school. Perhaps they're spending a long time doing their homework, or perhaps refusing or not handing any homework in at all. So I think there's things like looking at behavioral changes, emotional changes, social changes, as well as academic.
So, Maddie, a very Malaysian thing is going to be, if you're not doing well in school, tuition is the answer, some form of enrichment. But that I think is looking at it from, here's the standard and you're not there, so I'm going to try and push you somehow. But if you were to look at it from the child's perspective, how do we understand why they are struggling?
Well, on the subject of tuition, I kind of feel like learners, they come to school, they receive a certain amount of knowledge, they're participating, they're putting all their all in. So when it's time to go home, I do think it's important to find the balance with then, if out of school activities are needed or required, then they should be a passionate interest, something that the learner really, really is interested in and wants to develop.
All right. Dr. Rajini, any thoughts, why children, to be able to understand that it's not for lack of trying from the child's perspective?
Yeah, I think, and this is where we need to tease out the kids who are not trying because they cannot do it, versus the children who possibly can do it, but there could be other emotional challenges that the child is facing. Yeah. For example, some children who are very sociable, when they have difficulties with friends, and then they go to school, and children who are bullied or teased, etc., and then they go to school and they're very stressed about that whole other social aspect. So then they may come across as struggling with their learning as well. The other thing is children who really are not independent. And I always, one of the things I always tell parents before children go to schools is preparing them for going to school is not just about preparing them to read, write, etc. It's preparing them to go and use a communal toilet, which often gets dirty, and even little things like that. I've had a situation where a child was anxious about going to school because he didn't like going to the toilet. And then his attention was affected, and, it was perceived that that child actually maybe had attention deficit, but actually it was anxieties about other things related to learning. Yeah. So, it's those things. And even a child who is not independent in taking care of themselves, then to expect them to learn would be difficult.
Is that idea of is the idea of children having different styles of learning, is that a myth, Dr. Rajini, or is it true?
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, you look at different I know we always hear about the visual learner, the auditory learner, the kinesthetic learner, but I think it's important to know that you shouldn't put them in those little boxes. I mean, I think this is coming from my perspective. yes, there are some children, I deal with a lot with children with difficulties. There are some children who may be better at picking up things visually, and to a lesser extent auditorily. Personally, I think a lot of kids nowadays learn through experience, and if it makes sense to them. We were just talking to one child this morning, and mom was talking about how he has difficulties converting length. And, one of the things we did in the session was actually getting him to use a ruler and measure things around the room. And he actually could do it because he was motivated to do it. So this is a child who's learning through his experience. So I don't think we should put them in those separate boxes, but understand that for different things, maybe they use different strengths. And I mean, this is something I think an educator is probably better at picking up. But
yeah. So Maddie, what does that look like? What do different learning styles look like in a classroom?
Well, I think things that we can pick up quite early on is like with the visual learner, they have like a strong interest in the arts, really passionate about painting, crafting and drawing. Perhaps they're the learners who've got vivid imaginations. Perhaps they're good at like visual memory games as well. So we've got auditory learners. So those are the ones who'll be shining when it comes to vocal or musical abilities. Perhaps they like to sing along to songs when they're doing their homework, or always asking, oh, can we play a song in class at the same time as doing this? They perhaps have got good verbal skills and enjoy participating in discussions. Maybe these are also learners who can multitask, who can listen to instructions at the same time as doing something else. And then keeping an eye out for the kinesthetic learners as well. So those are the ones with the talent for the sports. Perhaps they're the ones that enjoy dancing and all the physical hands-on activities as well. They'll have good like hand-eye coordination. Perhaps having a tendency to fidget at the same time as information is being given to them. There's other styles as well, like logical learning styles, social, solitary as well.
All right. But as Dr. Rajini has said, you don't want to be labeling children as you are this type and therefore you cannot do other things. How, Maddie, in the classroom, how do you accommodate when you have children who just, have different styles, different abilities, but at the end of the day, they are all in one classroom together. They're following pretty much the same syllabus.
I think the key is to mixing and matching, realizing that every learner is different. Every learner has interests in different areas, and kind of like try to incorporate as many different styles as the teachers can. So obviously, like learning is all about like retaining, recalling and using that information later on. So even as a teacher, just on a very basic level, when instructions are being given out, we should write them on the board. So then our visual learners can read them. We can read the instructions out to the class. So again, that's for the auditory learners. And then maybe do a task like underline the key points for the kinesthetic learners as well. So again, it is important that we address and look at the different learning styles. So it is equal opportunities for every learner in the class to access all of that curriculum in one method or another. And then when we give tasks and we facilitate them, they don't have to be the same task for every single learner. One could be like in one group have a discussion, group could be drawing a picture, one group could like make a video about something as well. So it's looking at the way that the lesson is delivered, and also assessment doesn't have to be a standardized one method fits all as well, giving every opportunity for the learners to shine in their strength areas. And we might have learners who are very visual in one subject, but a lot more kinesthetic in another as well. So just understanding that they will mix and match themselves and adapt. We also can do things like giving learners some tasks where they learn about what their own learning style is, so they can become an advocate and be better informed about the choices they make about what activities they would prefer to do in the classroom.
Dr. Rajini, within the local Malaysian perspective, we have a comment from Sher here, who has pointed out, just for instance, if you look at children from rural areas compared to urban areas, and their capacity, perhaps in their standards, may be different. Is it fair that children are being subjected to the same assessments? Just picking up from Maddie's point about assessments even have to be tailored? What do you think?
Definitely not. I mean, we're trained to do assessments, developmental assessments for children. And, over the years, with one specific assessment tool, they've always sort of revised the questions that were put in because times change, right? And classic one was a couple of years ago, not a couple of years ago, more than 10 years ago, one of the questions was, what would you do if you missed a bus when going to school? Hardly anybody takes a bus nowadays, so they had to revise that to make it more generic and applicable. So in the same way, if we think about our school curriculums, we should be doing that, and there should be some flexibility in what materials you present. Yeah, because the urban setting versus the rural setting is going to be completely different. And I think this is where we expect some creativity from teachers. It's the same when you have a classroom. We went through a phase in our Malaysian education system where we were streaming kids. And then a couple of years ago, it was no more streaming. So you had children with mixed abilities in the classroom again. The creative teachers were doing things which we term differentiated learning, so that different abilities could be assessed differently. But then this was not applicable throughout. Not all teachers were doing that, and you could ask yourself the question of course you're going to make children fail if you don't tailor your assessments or your learning based on the environment that they're in. And I think this is a big challenge for the future. For education.
Maddie, online learning must have made it much more challenging in order to be able to have those sort of, be able to assess one-on-one, realize and recognize which kids need different kinds of ways of learning. What has your experience been with online learning?
I think initially for everybody who had to suddenly adjust from teaching in a classroom to teaching online, it was extremely challenging, both for the teaching professionals as well as the learners. But over time, we kind of learned from each other systems that worked out, making sure I personally found the start of every lesson was making a connection with the learners, as you would do in a classroom. Spend the first few minutes checking in with everybody, seeing how everybody is feeling, gauging that. Obviously, in a classroom environment, that's so easy. You just kind of walk around and have a general chit chat with the different learners. But suddenly when you're online, it seemed a little bit uncomfortable to do that initially. And so that was something that I learned quickly, that I thought, this I need to do every single lesson, and just to gauge, because you can't always pick up on the body language cues, the way that the learners walk into the classroom as well. And then again, setting one set of work and then differentiating it for each of the learners. So working out a system, even just on the computer, where you could have multiple screens open so you could still track what each learner was doing as well. In a classroom, you just walk around and look at their screen or look at their work. So this was having to accommodate that and making sure you could still check in and mark and give personalized comments to the learners at that same time. And then we had great functions such as breakout rooms. So learners had the opportunity to have discussions in groups and also then one-on-one together with teachers as well. So although initially it was a big challenge, but I think ultimately everybody we got into a system that worked well, and then learners started to, as they look forward to coming to school and look forward to coming to class, they look forward to coming online and like, oh yes, I'm going to connect with my friends, I'm going to see my friends here. So then again, adapting the task that you did, that you would have done in a classroom, but again, making sure that you tweaked it so that you could do a similar style online activity where discussions and crafting projects and teamwork and collaboration could all continue to take place.
Dr. Rajini, were you hearing feedback from parents with kids in national mainstream schools about their kids struggling, and perhaps due to just different learning abilities and online learning just not being able to match up to that?
Yes, and different stories. Some schools would not doing lessons online. They were just sending parents homework sheets to be completed at home. There were some schools where teachers were a little bit more creative. They did quizzes online, which was positive. And then today, one family that I saw earlier were telling me how the teachers certain teachers grouped sort of 3 classes together. So, you had, 2 or 3 classes. So you had 70 children online at the same time, which, this is at the year 1 and year 2 level. So that can be very challenging. I mean, I can just imagine how difficult that is for the child as well as for the teacher. And, what was interesting was that the younger teachers, some of them were a little more IT savvy and could make learning a little bit more fun. Not across the board. Some older teachers did try. As a parent myself, I could also see how, with a bunch of teenagers, it can be difficult, but some teachers did that successfully. But I think for a lot of the local schools, there were issues with IT training in using technology, I think, and that's something that I think we need to look forward and see whether, because it's not going to go away, right? Even with lockdowns over, they may come back. But more interestingly is the fact that I think our kids, with the lockdowns, have discovered technology, and they love technology now. So we've got to find a way to make them love learning through technology, personally, I think.
Yeah, so I just want to read this comment from Zainal Zain Ibrahim, who says, with internet, our children have become more, quote unquote, rebellious. So we need to be more accommodating in the way they learn so that they become more happy to learn in schools. But what I'm taking away from that is that technology is their world right now. It is the way they communicate, learn, play, get entertainment. It's just about, incorporating learning in a meaningful way using technology. But I'd like to look more specifically at learning disabilities. Now, those are a different kettle of fish. Dr. Rajini, when should parents suspect that their child may have a learning disability, that it's not just a different style, perhaps? And what should they do to get the right diagnosis?
I think we need to start looking out from when they're in their preschool years or even as toddlers. When you have children who play differently, that's already telling you that they are learning things differently, because play reflects what children interpret around them. Yeah, they see what's going on and they incorporate that into play. For example, at 18 months, a child will pick up the phone and pretend to say hello. Or in this day, some parents say the child picks up something like the remote control and starts pressing buttons or moving the hands like they're swiping. So they're picking up what they see around them, and then they reflect that in their play. If your child is not doing that pretend play, imaginative play, etc., that's already a sign that your child may have some cognitive difficulties. And research shows that play is one of the best predictors of cognitive abilities in the longer term. Yeah. Number 2, like I said, language difficulties. So if your child is struggling to pick up language or learns language in a different way, for example, if you are a Malay or Mandarin speaking family, but your child is speaking only in English, I would be concerned, because your child has not picked up learning the language from you in a natural way. Your child's probably picked it up by watching YouTube, but that's not a natural way of learning. And when we talk about learning in schools, you're supposed to be learning from your peers, your teachers, from the interactions that you have with people. Yeah. So I would say these are some of the red flags. Then, of course, there are other red flags. For example, if your child has motor difficulties, and by the time they're 5, no matter how much you've trained them to learn to write their name, or they can't even draw a stick man at 5, that would worry me. I know this doesn't, I haven't even touched on ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, right, Shiao? And this is often a myth that parents think that if their children learn their ABCs and 1, 2, 3s under the age of 2, or under the age of 3, that the kids are going to be geniuses. And it's actually not so. Yeah. Yes, of course, you should know your alphabets or phonetic sounds by the time you hit 4.5. You should be able to recognize them and associate them with sounds, 4.5 to 5. And if you're not doing it by that age, the phonetic sounds especially, that's a little alarm bell for me as well.
All right, you've dashed the hopes of many parents, but also those red flags. And they're very similar in terms of what we talked about earlier. If we're just looking at children who may be struggling overall with learning anyway. Maddie, as a special education teacher, and I know you deal with older kids as well, so this is really interesting because you're preparing them to receive an education, to prepare them for adulthood. But for children with learning disabilities, what are some misconceptions that you'd like to correct when it comes to their ability to learn and to attain education?
Well, I think first of all is people with learning difficulties have low IQ. So
That's a misconception.
Totally a misconception. I think if you have the mindset that anything is achievable and given the right opportunities and access to that, then it is possible. You might think 5 years down the line, you might not have achieved at the same target of other learners of a similar age, but it could be a few years down the line. We've got like classic examples here, like Albert Einstein, for example. Okay, the records show that he didn't talk until he was 3 years old. And then he had trouble with dyslexia, dyscalculia, he had difficulty writing, difficulty recalling words, and yet he's a mathematical genius and was even the award winner of the Nobel Prize. We've got entrepreneurs as well who had a lot of learning difficulties at school. So an idol of mine, Richard Branson, who's the founder of Virgin, he reports back that he failed most of his tests at high school, and yet he is able to have many, many different businesses all over the world. We've got clothing designers such as Tommy Hilfiger. He also said that learning at school was an enormous struggle. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, he had dyslexia, and yet look what he has done to the world of technology and computer-aided design.
So they defy all the misconceptions and myths that are placed on people with learning disabilities. And, in fact, I guess this just points to the fact that education isn't about attaining, and I know you've said this many times as well, Dr. Rajini, isn't about attaining just reading and writing skills or math skills alone. It's that preparation, right, for resilience, independence, adulthood. We did ask a question on Instagram leading up to this webinar: what skills should children be learning in school to prepare them for adulthood? Financial literacy came in top, by the way. And other things that people thought important: emotional intelligence, problem solving, people skills and communication, digital literacy, critical thinking, leadership skills, agriculture, interestingly enough. Not a single ABC 1, 2, 3, anything to do with math or really hard science subjects in there. So I think people do recognize that education is broader than the paper skills. Before we continue with looking at accommodating learning disabilities in mainstream schools, we do have a question that perhaps Maddie could help with. This seems suitable for an educator. Tan Po Lee is asking, children are too advanced with technology, especially playing games and watching YouTube. It's diverted their attention when it comes to studies. How can we make them focus on their studies?
Wow, I think this question is affects many parents here. I think it is all about finding a balance. We know in order to learn, we do need to be engaged. We need to find that activity fun in order to do it. Perhaps there's a deadline. So perhaps setting a restriction on homework must be done, and then use of technology can be done at a later time, making sure that technology is not being used all through the night as well. So they can be parental controls that you can put onto devices as well. I think rather than banning the use of technology, if they've been given a task at school which asks them to be creative, then it's working together with your child to say, like, if they're showing an interest in Minecraft and they need to create something. Perhaps they could use their technology skills to advance their learning and use that within their projects as well. If they need to make a presentation, perhaps they could as you say, you could use YouTube, you could make their own video and use it to their advantage as well, rather than putting a point blank on, oh, you can't use it until that. So I think it's between family members finding a good balance with what works best for them and for their child too.
And speaking of YouTube, this question is not on the topic of learning as such, but it's so interesting. Aaron is asking, there are a lot of useless videos on YouTube showing kids playing with toys, adults with slapstick actions. Kids are attracted to this, and worst of all, it's what keeps them glued to the screens. Dr. Rajini, what do you think? Is this kind of content harmful for kids? Sorry, you're muted, Dr. Rajini.
Sorry. You know, I know a lot of parents think that, you know, unboxing toys is something ridiculous and children should. I would say it's better to watch someone talking, hopefully with using decent language, and unboxing a toy, rather than watching a cartoon character that does not talk jumping around the screen. So at least there's a little bit of language there. It's always a balance, right? But you have to ask yourself, why are they more attracted to that? Maybe it's us. Maybe it's us not providing them with fun activities. You know, if we want kids to move away from the screen, we have to, like Maddie said, set the limits. But we also have to, and as she mentioned before, you've got to make other things fun as well. They've got to see that we as adults are not just hooked on our gadgets as well, and that we find enjoyment in other things apart from screens. So it's about modeling that behavior. It's about enforcing boundaries, and it's about making life fun for them as well, and doing things together as a family. So they, you know, that then adds on to that building of communication. And once you have good communication with your children, you can explain to them why certain things may be harmful or not.
You know, Dr. Rajini, we did also run a poll on Twitter and Instagram asking, do you think our education system caters to different ways of learning? Not very surprisingly, the majority of answers were no. 84.5% answered no. You know, coming back to learning disabilities, Dr. Rajini, how we know the national education system has its challenges, and resource challenges are probably top among them. How can we accommodate students with learning disabilities, though, in mainstream schools? I think the special education schools are more targeted in a sense. But if we're talking about mainstreaming, perhaps examples of schools that are doing a good job.
So in our Malaysian education system, within some schools, you have the mainstream classes, and then you have the special education classes. Yeah. Now, although they may be in the same school, it does not necessarily mean there is inclusion per se. However, as you know, the new education blueprint is pushing for inclusion. And if I'm not if I'm not mistaken, the target is achieving 75% inclusion in just 2 or 3 years' time. Yeah. Now, some schools do it well through the co-curricular activities. Yeah. So they may have sports together, or they may have scouts together, something like that. In some schools, I'm not going to name schools specifically, but there are some schools where they even have started academic inclusion. So if a child may be able to cope with a certain level of education now, although they may be 9 years old, maybe they now have achieved skills that are equivalent to someone who's 7 years old, they may discuss it with parents and decide whether or not to include that child in the 7-year-old class. So although that child should be in year 3, they're included in core subjects for year 1. Okay, but they still go back to the special education classes for the non-core subjects and non-core activities, or they may have extra support during those non-core subjects while their mainstream counterparts are doing those non-core subjects. So some schools do it well. Some schools don't. We know that within our mainstream classes, because not all parents consent to their children being placed in the special education classes, and it is their right to not consent. Some schools do, or I should say some teachers have differentiated learning within a classroom. Some schools have what they call kelas pemulihan, or sort of enrichment classes, where they may not strictly be following the syllabus for that year, but maybe focusing on improving that child's basic literacy and numeracy skills. We have stories of this happening in certain schools, and it seems to be schools that have good leadership, teachers who are willing to do this. Now, we have a national education blueprint that says inclusion is a must, but they have given schools the leeway in terms of how they want to do it. And this is where I think parent advocates are important, and this is where parents need to get involved in their child's learning.
Which leads me nicely to the next point and question about working with parents, Maddie. Chia is asking, what can parents do to teach their child with learning disabilities in terms of communication and social skills during the pandemic? I'd broaden that a little bit, Maddie, and ask if you could address just, what can parents do to support children with learning disabilities?
Well, I think if you're working from a home, then it's like seizing every opportunity that you have. So, for example, if you happen to be in the car and you're driving somewhere, you can model certain behavior. You can, let's say, let's play a game together. Let's practice your mathematical skills, or let's count the number of birds that we see on the journey, and things like that as well. So I'm just rereading the question here.
The question is quite specific in terms of communication and social skills during the pandemic. I mean, you have touched on that a little bit. It's all part of the daily experience that parents have with kids.
I think it's just seeking all the opportunities you can to impart those to your child. So when you are, for example, cooking your dinner, invite your child to come along and be involved in that process as well. So you can teach them the skill of how to cook. You can teach them fine and gross motor skills in terms of how to hold a knife, manipulative skills in terms of being able to wash things as well. And then whilst you're doing that, for the communication side, talk through all the steps. So it's like a think aloud kind of strategy. We say, oh, here's an apple. I'm now going to wash the apple underneath the tap. Can you help me turn the tap on? And just to try to get your child involved as much in that process as possible at every opportunity as well. So talking about the food that you've got on the table, what things do they like and what do they not like? Do they know about healthy eating? So just trying to incorporate really education into everyday life.
We have another question from Sabrina here. What's your view on grouping students based on their capabilities versus grouping them by age? I don't know. Dr. Rajini first, perhaps?
Should be the educationist answering that, but it's if I look at preschool children, it shouldn't matter, right? Whether you're in a 3-year-old class or a 4-year-old class. I think it's always good to look at the social ability of the child. Just because a child is not learning at the same age, if the child is socially at the level of his peers, then it would be wrong to pull that child down to be with children who may be at a much lower social level. So I think you have to look at that aspect of it as well. It's not just looking at what their level of reading is or writing is. It's looking at the child more holistically in terms of their capabilities as well. That's my.
What are your thoughts on this, Maddie?
Yes, I think, again, it's mixing and matching depending on what their social level is as well. So what we do at Nexus, we have certain subjects and certain classes where they will be together with learners of the same age group of them as them. And then also we will swap. And if we find that they're perhaps a lower level, we will have a mixed class with learners from year 7, perhaps all the way up to 13, because they are at that same academic level for that certain subject. So it is looking individually at that child and what they need, rather than doing it purely on age or purely on subject as well. So again, mixing and matching and being learner focused.
Overall, Maddie, what do we want children to achieve when we're having these discussions about different learning abilities? We're looking at differentiated teaching and recognizing where difficulties may arise. What do we want them to achieve from their whole childhood of learning?
Well, I think the ultimate goal is to have happiness. And I feel like that comes from having a supportive system around you and looking forward to the future. Enjoy what they're doing, enjoying the present, enjoying the opportunities that they foresee ahead of them. And I do feel like paying a contribution to society and having a certain level of independence and knowing that your impact will have an effect on others, and how you can work together and contribute to people around you and people beyond the classroom, beyond the family home. And I always say promoting engagement within the community, looking at service opportunities, because I feel like getting involved in these kinds of activities later on, it leads up to perhaps employment skills, independent skills, work experience and development. And suddenly, where you might feel initially, oh my goodness, I'm stuck in this situation. But when you start to experience things, the world, as we say, the world is your oyster. You have lots of opportunities, lots of experiences, and then you have that greater sense of happiness. You have that opened mindset, willingness to try different things. And for me, that's the ultimate goal, to every morning to wake up, to be happy, to be grateful for what you've got, and look forward to the future ahead of you.
Dr. Rajini, your thoughts?
I like that. What Maddie's just said. I always say to parents, because I deal a lot with children who have different learning abilities, I always say to parents, there's no one pathway that we need to take. And that at the end of the day, it's more important to train or to nurture independence. And as Maddie said, that child is able to feel that they have the ability to contribute. Yeah, we're always often trying to highlight the negatives in children with different learning abilities. We highlight them unconsciously by saying, oh, I'm going to help you by getting you a tutor or getting you to go to this class so you can improve, instead of saying, why don't we get teacher so-and-so to help us do this so that in future you can work out how to buy things, giving them that idea that you're learning this not to get an A or to pass the exam so you can move on to the next level, but you need this. Like when mommy goes shopping and mommy has to work out the change to make sure that the person doesn't cheat me, things like that. So, and I think it's important that parents think of learning as, nurturing those life skills. It's okay if you can't do math. All phones now have a calculator, and you can work out, things like change and balance by using a calculator. You don't need to have really, you don't need to speak the same language as the other person. We have such things called messaging services, translations, etc. Yeah, you don't need to be perfect at spelling, because there are spell checks in in our WhatsApp messaging services or even on computer programs. So think about working on things that you can improve, that make it easier for your child to succeed, rather than always focusing on the negatives that you want to correct and perfect.
You're speaking the language of every child, Dr. Rajini. And that's exactly the takeaway message I'm getting, focusing on the child. It's learner-centered, it's child-centered. Thank you so much, Dr. Rajini, consultant, developmental pediatrician, and Madeleine Proud, Alternative Pathway Curriculum Coordinator at Nexus International School. The rest of you do stay on. I've got some more exciting stuff coming up, but thank you again for joining us today, Dr. Rajini and Madeleine. And, do download our kids playbook from the link provided in the comments. As Dr. Rajini has said, play is the most important thing for kids to learn. So our playbook has fun activities for children, incorporating the concept of learning through play. And by downloading this playbook, you'll be in the running for our lucky draw. And we have a quiz now for all of you. So on your phone or on your computer, go to kahoot.it, the website kahoot.it in your browser, and key in the pin code, which is 4398516. So go to kahoot.it, where you'll be able to participate in our quiz. The pin code is 4398516. You'll be asked to enter your email address, so please make sure it's a valid address, and followed by the name that you'd like to use for the quiz. So this is a quiz where we have 3 questions for you. The fastest person to answer the quiz questions and get all of them right will win a Touch and Go e-wallet reload pin worth 20 ringgit, courtesy of AIA Vitality, as well as a BFM collapsible mug. I know this is our way of assessing whether you have learned from the webinar that you've been watching, but it's just a little bit of fun for one of you to win the lucky prize. So just a last reminder, kahoot.it, pin code 4398516, enter a valid email address, followed by the name that you'd like to use in the quiz. And we have our participants coming in right now, so we'll just wait for more people to join before we begin the quiz. Just a reminder, the lucky winner will get a Touch and Go e-wallet reload pin worth 20 ringgit, courtesy of AIA Vitality, as well as a BFM collapsible mug, which is very handy for takeaway drinks. All right, so we've got quite a number of participants in. We'll be starting the quiz now. Are you ready? And we'll get our first question now, which is, from a young age, children learn through play, memorizing, or reading. If you've been watching even half of this webinar, you would definitely know the answer. Play, memorizing, or reading. How do children learn from a young age? And we have our votes in, and the correct answer is play, which most of you got right. And the second question coming up. That's our leaderboard right there. True or false? Autism is a learning disability. This may be a tricky one. Is autism a learning disability? True or false? False is the correct answer, but it's evenly distributed within your answers. Now let's move on to our last question now. Again, a true or false question. A child with a learning disability has lower intelligence. And we know that Maddie did address this as one of the issues that she faces when it comes to questions about children with learning disability. Child with a learning disability has a lower intelligence, true or false? And let's see how all of you did. The correct answer is false. And all of you got that right. So let's look at our results to find out who is the lucky winner. And the winner of our Kahoot quiz today is Bay LC. Congratulations, Bay. Please contact our BFM events team with your full name and contact details to redeem your prize. Remember to use the email address that you registered on Kahoot earlier. Our BFM events team's email will be in the comments section for you to get in touch with them. For the rest of you, again, do join our lucky draw. Download the kids playbook from the link that you can see in the comments. You'll be in the running to win a touch and go e-wallet reload pin. This one's worth 200 ringgit, courtesy of AIA Vitality. The winner of the lucky draw, and as well as the winner of the grand lucky draw that's coming up, will be announced on our social media pages. So do follow us on BFM Radio, on our Facebook pages, Twitter, or Instagram. So the grand lucky draw is where you have to watch all of our webinars, download all the exclusive materials, so you can catch up on all of them at our BFM Facebook page. And the grand lucky draw prize is our Samsung Galaxy Watch Active 2 worth 999 ringgit, courtesy of AIA Vitality. For all of you who have stayed on with us, do give us your feedback. We have a form in our comments section and tell us how we can improve for your benefit. As always, thank you so much to our presenting sponsor, AIA Berhad, for making this series of webinars from April right up to November possible. Thank you to all of you for following us, for catching us, following our discussions on all of the interesting topics where we've had experts sharing with us. And as I mentioned earlier, follow BFM's social media pages to stay updated on who the winners are, as well as our activities for 2022. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next year, hopefully.